first bloop of the day. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Really delighted to have the chance to talk together with Craig and Stefano today. Really about taking a different approach to rare disease drug development, and in particular, they're going to tell us today about their experience developing Waskyra. So before we get into that, I wonder, Stefano, if you'd mind just setting the scene a little bit and telling us a little bit about your work at the Foundation Fondazione Telethon and the work you do there.
Yeah, of course. Very happy to. So Fondazione Telethon is an Italian-based charity. We're a charity in the sense that we fundraise money from Italian citizens to invest them in research on rare genetic disease. And so the idea behind the Fondazione that was created by a patient association is that we need to advance biomedical research towards the treatment of genetic diseases. And we know that genetic diseases are all rare or very rare. And so our vision during the years was to transform the results of excellent science into products, into therapies that can be administered to patients. And we've built Fondazione was created in 1990. And so in 35 years, we've built a whole structure around this vision that includes, and started with a peer review system to select excellent science. We are a grant-making organization, so we do fund research into our two intramural research institutes, one in Milan and one in Naples, but also through open grant for researchers around Italy. And that, that excellence in science was really our North Star for the first 20 years, I would say. And then we started adding more competencies and infrastructure around therapy development, and especially ATMPs, so gene therapies for rare genetic disease. And we created a whole ecosystem around that to support the development of therapy. And the last step that we added, and the last piece of this puzzle that we added recently, is really a path to make these therapies to the market, so to regulatory approval and then distribution. That's where my role kind of kicked in as market access, because now, despite being a charity, so remaining a not-for-profit, we also market two therapies, and that happened in the last 3 years, basically. We first took back one therapy that was already on the market, but was going to be withdrawn because the industry that was distributing that was not interested anymore. So we took it back and we started distributing ourselves. And then with Waskyra, that we're now launching in Europe and in the US. And so that's my role, is really to make sure that this product is reimbursed and is accessible for the patients.
Great. Thanks, Stefano. And Craig, can you give us a brief summary about your work at Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator?
Sure, happy to. So Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator is a nonprofit biotech, not a charitable organization. We're industry people, but we formed as a nonprofit to leverage tax and other incentives to try and liberate shelved clinical stage therapies that were sitting at biotechs or had been handed back to academic medical institutions, and find a different path forward, because all too often the science was good, the math wasn't what was working, and so we need a different business model in order to get more of these therapies to patients at scale. You'll also see Orphan Therapies, which is our commercial subsidiary, which is the arm that we're using to help commercialize Waskyra in the US in partnership with Fondazione Telethon. A little bit about our history. We are younger than our partners. We were officially formed in June of 2024, received our tax-exempt status in December of 2024, and then got our first partners and funders involved in April. In August, we had, along the way, started to realize that it wasn't just clinical stage therapies that were needing alternative paths forward. It was also commercial or near commercial stage therapies that were getting close to an approval or had been approved. And that was really our conversations with Fondazione Telethon started in, I think, April of 2025. And then in December, we formalized our partnership And in January, we announced another partnership with the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy to launch a marketplace for shelved cell and gene therapies, because we recognized that there were only so many of them we were going to be able to take forward, develop, and/or commercialize ourselves. We needed to expose more of these programs to different classes of investors as a different class of investment, where they could potentially move these programs forward, get them to patients within 2 or 3 years, see some return on that investment in that period of time as well. So, been busy.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to Waskyra, it's a fantastic success story. So it was approved by the FDA in December of 2025, and it was the first autologous cell-based gene therapy for, I'm going to get this right, Wiskott-Aldrich Syndrome, or WAS. So I'm wondering, Stefano, can you just take us back to the beginning? What is WAS, and when did your work start in this area?
Yeah. So Wiskott-Aldrich is a very rare syndrome that causes immunodeficiency and a platelet defect. So those kids suffer from frequent infections, quite severe infections, and bleeding events, quite severe bleeding events. So the whole journey started back in, before, but let's say the clinical journey started in 2010. So you can see 16 years ago. That's quite a long time. And we ran the first clinical studies within our research institute in Milan, so in partnership with the university hospital there, Sara Hospital. And we treated the first 8 patients with the fresh formulation of this ex vivo gene therapy. Then based on those results, we could partner with an industry. At that time was GSK that took this program together with others program that we had in our portfolio to further develop them. And so we kept kind of treating patients in an expanded access program, waiting for setting up a pivotal confirmatory trial. That period of time, we realized that for the sake of distributing the product, the fresh formulation was not ideal, because that implies that you can only treat the patients very close to where you manufacture the product, which is kind of limiting your possibility to distribute it. And so this second trial was run with the cryopreserved formulation of the product. The product is what allowed us now to distribute in the US and in other places, because the cells are harvested from the patients, sent to Milan, where they are manufactured, cryopreserved, and sent back to the centers. It's also safer for the patients, because that gives you a bit more time for the quality checks on the product before infusing it back into the patient. So based on that, all in all, we treated 27 patients that were analyzed in one single kind of package and submitted together to the authority. And we just got the good news yesterday that it was published in Pink Sheet, a paper that came out yesterday, just saying that Fondazione Telethon, I'm quoting because I want to make this wrong, Fondazione Telethon Waskyra, one of the best ATMP submission said by an EMA advisor, Catherine Dray, that followed the project. So very proud that this whole process led, despite the small number of patients, of course due to the rarity of the disease, but led to a very robust evidence package. And so, as you can see there, we really started with the very basic science, very basic research on vectors, on the disease, on designing the therapy at an academic level, pre-research level, and we brought it to the way, all the way up to US FDA and EMA approval. That was a long journey, not easy. And I think that, despite the bit of a disappointment we had when the company we're partnering with decided to withdraw, but to be honest and fair, the work they have done in industrializing the manufacturing was key. Probably, without that input at that point in time, so after our first trial, I'm not sure we would have put together that, robust package that we did at the end. So, yeah, I think that partnership kind of was really essential in developing a robust package for the authority.
And so when you came together here, what was the ambition? Did you have a shared vision of what success would look like? As you said, it was a long road.
Yeah, so honestly, when we started with this, it was clear, because it was in our kind of DNA as an organization, that we wanted to make this therapy approved product so that it could be accessible for patients in a sustainable way, not just within a trial that has a start and an end, but that could remain there. But on the other side, our vision was, okay, let's do the first in human, let's prove it works in human, and then we will partner with somebody, and that will bring it to the market. So the idea when we started this program was we wanted to reach the approval, but we won't do it ourselves. We will just out-license it to some company that will do, and this is what we have done. Honestly, this was the model. This was, the idea. Till when we realized that, they were not moving forward, and they decided to step back. And I think that, one thing that I always remember, one of my, head of business development, former head of business development at Fondazione Telethon also said, when you enter into a license, when an agreement with an industry, with a pharma, is like a marriage. You should start thinking in divorce. And what could happen if at some point you need to divorce, which, is what happened, honestly. So I think that it was good thing is that agreement was designed to be, in a way that could still allow us to take back the product and move forward. We had an agreement with the company that every data produced during the collaboration was to given back to us if they decided to withdraw and stop the development. There were a lot of clauses that really helped us being always aware and always involved in the development, so that when the product came back to us, it was not it was a surprise, but we were ready to take it and bring it forward.
Great. So I wonder if we can just touch a little bit more on some of the too soon.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Just a bit more on kind of the technical details, part of the development. So at LifeArc, we really champion the use of target product profiles. So as we know, these are strategic blueprints that really set out the characteristics of a new therapy. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the development of Waskyra, was this something that you used?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's also pivotal for us. This is something that we try to define earlier and earlier, honestly. With the new programs in the pipeline, we tend to back, I wouldn't say we were too naive, but we were kind of naive back in the time. So with this idea that, at some point we will give this to a partner and they will take care of that and they will do it. Now we realize that, especially because as you can see, the development path of these therapies for very rare disease tends to rely on few trials, very small one, single arm. So you need to have a very, very clear idea where you want to go with your product since the beginning, because you don't have much chances in a way to add up additional evidence, because patients are difficult to find. There are few. It's very expensive, the manufacturing of the product, as an ex vivo gene therapy, so it's an autologous product. So every patient is a single batch in terms of manufacturing, which makes it extremely expensive to run trials as well. So you want to maximize, be very efficient in a way. And one of the good way to be efficient is to have very clear in mind where you want to go. And TPP is one of those tools that really helps, having clarity of where you need to go, what you need to put together before, as soon as possible.
Yeah. And just extending on that a little bit, how did you gain reassurance that you were potentially onto a winner before you, spent too much time and resource down a path? What really gave you that reassurance?
I think that the main reassurance came from the results of the first trial and looking at those kids growing up with basically no infections anymore, with no bleeding events anymore. So the clinical data were so strong, that was a no-brainer to say that was a product that was worth pursuing the development for. And I think that also was one part of why we felt so much responsibility and the pressure of making it available and bringing it to marketing authorization, because the results were so clear that it was kind of not acceptable. When you see that kid that you have treated 15 years ago has grown up and is now doing wrestling, which is probably not the best sport for a kid suffering of bleeding events, right? So, but they do that. So say, well, we should do something. We can't let this go.
And again, you've touched on it a little bit there, but gaining approval for new treatments is, can be notoriously difficult. And I'm just wondering, how important was your interaction with the regulators along the way and their input? What stages of development did you start talking to them? And what was their feedback?
I think that we had very good interactions with regulators all the way through, I would say, both the Italian ones and the European regulators. Waskyra was also added into this pilot scheme by EMA for ATMPs developed by not-for-profit or academic institutes in 2022, and that was also kind of helpful for this constant dialogue with regulators. And consider also that, out of the same, from the Telethon research, same organization, same institute, came out of first ex vivo gene therapy approved in Europe, which is Strimvelis, that was approved back in 2016. It's now 10 years old. It was just got the renewal. So I would say that we had a very long-standing kind of partnership with regulators on these kind of therapies. And so, but that was extremely important for the design of the trial, for understanding what they wanted from us in terms of CMC, kind of package. So that was crucial. And the pilot, I think, did kind of help. It waived a bit of the costs also for the submission of the market authorization, which is not trivial for a charity like us. And so that was very useful.
Were there any discussions that you had with or feedback from the regulators that prompted any real-time changes to your original approach?
Well, I think that probably the main interaction we had with them and that was done by our industrial partner, but we were always kind of with them on that. It was really this shift from fresh to preserved product. There, it was a clear direction that the partner wanted to take, which makes a lot of sense. But there was a bit of discussion with the agency to find out, what could be a good kind of bridging study to make that acceptable. Because out of 27 patients, only 10 have been treated with that. So, that design of that trial was really a moment where interaction with regulators kind of shift a bit the design of that.
And thinking about patients and patient interaction, how important was this? Did you engage with patient advocacy groups or, patients themselves?
I think, patients are very important for us as an organization in general. I would say that, we do partner a lot with them. Also, they help us a lot also with the fundraising campaign. So, and they help us a lot in all the interactions, also with somehow the regulators in a way, because they've always been strong advocate for this therapy, and they still are. And so they're really crucial. It's very important to have a fair partnership with them and a transparent partnership with them. I think one of the things we've learned is that, to manage a bit the expectations of the patients, but to be very clear what your objective is since the very beginning. So, we have been, I think that we have a bit of trust from the patients because we have been very transparent in saying, we want to bring this to the approval because that is the way to make it available to all the patients, at least in Europe and in the US. And so this is where we are going, and we will keep going that way. Even when we started partnering with industry, which at the beginning was not, I wouldn't say well taken, but from the perspective of the patient was kind of, but wow, you're a charity now, you're partnering with the industry. Why are you doing that? You're kind of losing your nature in a way of not-for-profit. As we try to explain them, that was the quickest and more effective way to bring the therapy to the market, which was the final goal we all had. And so then when the industry decided to step back, it was kind of an obvious choice, also respectful of this kind of pact with the patients to take it back and develop it.
Great. So I'd like to turn the discussion a bit more to the commercial aspects. So, you know, Waskyra doesn't meet the traditional standards for, or traditional industry standards for commercial viability. And in this case, innovative thinking is really, you know, as important as that commercial path. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about, you know, the alternative commercial model that you've developed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you know, the dynamics have changed in a way in recent years. The cost of risk capital is higher. Some of the incentives that had been in place in the U.S. for therapies like this were, you know, were tenuous and weren't available for a while. And so that changed the calculus for a lot of investment firms and industry. And, you know, this is we're going to treat 5 to 7 patients a year, right? So it's just not a model that works for a traditional for-profit company. You know, that said, in order to make it sustainably available to patients, you have to make it available in such a way that there's a sufficient margin to preserve operations, to scale operations, to get to other you know, markets where it may be needed. And so, you know, we've really tried to approach it from a very transparent way, thinking about sort of a cost plus kind of model. And, you know, the benefits of that are it helps to educate the regulators and payers as to what it really costs to develop a therapy like this, manufacture a therapy like this, and importantly, to meet the regulatory requirements associated with a therapy like this. And I think many times there isn't a lot of understanding of that amongst those stakeholders. And as a result, there are a lot of barriers to trying to get a treatment like this with so few patients, you know, make it available in a commercial setting. So that's, you know, really what we're focused on, is how do we develop a model, have lean operations, and rely on partnerships and collaboration to, you know, get the product to patients efficiently.
So I wonder if now's a good time to address the sort of elephant in the room, which is money. So yes, something that all too often acts as a major roadblock. So I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about your pricing and access strategy, and maybe some of the key factors that influence pricing in particular.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of a partnership like this is, you know, both of us are driven by ensuring that more therapies are accessible to patients. So it's not about optimizing profit, it's about optimizing access. You know, that said, we both recognize what can happen when a therapy isn't priced sufficiently to sustain access in a market. It's a lot harder to go back and renegotiate when that happens than it is to set the price where it needs to be at the outset. So we've been working very closely together on the costing and you know, the pricing model for Waskyra to try and ensure it's at a price point that is as low as it can be, but is still sustainable over time. You know, particularly as you move through a prevalent population and into an incident population. So, you know, we've tried to break it down in such a way that we understand what the fixed costs are. We're trying to account for unforeseen circumstances. As we came into this, there were tariffs, then maybe there weren't tariffs. You know, is MFN an issue? Is it not an issue? And so we have to deal with those still, you know, uncertainties in a way, and, you know, make sure that we've accounted for it properly. And, you know, Stefano, I know you guys have done a lot of work. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's that's the way we've approached it. We're trying to be, when we have a conversation with a payer, as transparent about that as we can be. And amongst ourselves, commit to the idea that if circumstances change in a way that's more favorable from a pricing perspective, then we can reduce the cost. Because ultimately, accessibility can be very much influenced by pricing.
Sounds like you've been kept on your toes. So I just before we open up to the audience for questions, and that's your cue to get ready with your questions. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about your platform, CGT Exchange.
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we're launching this week a marketplace for shelved cell and gene therapies in partnership with ASGCT. We recognized along the way that there are literally hundreds of programs out there that have good science. In many cases, those are programs that have advanced into clinical trials, are helping children, sometimes with transformative effects. And yet, these communities get the news that, sorry, we're not moving forward with this trial. And again, it's not industry not wanting to, it's that the dynamics just aren't there for them to commercialize it in a sustainable way. So we recognize that these assets need more visibility. We have a couple of AI-based platforms that we're utilizing to do diligence and predictive modeling so that we can surface information that is most relevant for both the traditional but also non-traditional investors, because it's going to require attracting, family offices or sovereign funds or donor-advised funds or, other types of sources of capital in order to address this at the scale of need and at the availability of the assets that are out there. So we're excited to be able to leverage some of the work we've been doing for Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator and make it accessible and available more broadly through this platform.
If I might, going back to what you were just saying, Greg, and the slides we had before, the cost, what we realized that when you are in that space of very ultra-rare disease, those fixed costs, so the cost that you incur, even if you don't treat any patients 1 year, like all the costs related with compliance with regulatory requirements, fees you have to pay to regulatory agency, long-term follow-up, CMC maintenance of the product, all those costs, tends to become very relevant, which is not the case in the traditional pharma model, where those fixed costs that are spread among many doses, many patients, tends to be negligible. That's the opposite here. So, all in all, they can account up to 60-70% of the overall cost structure, because and it's something that we kind of say as a joke, but that's true. We probably have more people working on maintaining this product on the market than patients that we treat. Honestly, you need the regulatory people, CMC people, clinical development, so on and so forth. They are more than the patients that you treat per year. So that is what really makes this not very sustainable in a way.
Great. Thank you both. I think, if we can open up to any questions in the audience. Come on, I gave you a cue to get your questions ready.
I think the after lunch moment is probably
Yeah.
This is a question of
Hi, I'm Nicola Redfern. I used to be the UK GM for Bluebird Bio in the UK. I'm just interested as to how you're going with conversations with regulators and payers and HTA bodies around reimbursement, because especially in the UK, we price based on value, not on cost plus at this point in time. It's a different proposal and one the industry will have very mixed feelings about. So I just wondered if you had any insights to share as to how those conversations were progressing at this point.
Yeah, can't tell really about UK because we haven't started that yet, but I can tell you about Italy, which is, pretending to do HTA a bit like UK, which is not the case, but fortunately in a way, from our perspective. But honestly, the first reaction was we were not aware. We have no clue, no idea of these costs. So when I started showing them, how much it costs to keep a product on the market in terms of really compliance, people that needs to work on the day-by-day maintenance of the manufacturing, the processes, update, submit changes, variations for everything that it happens in your manufacturing process of this product is very complex, and every single patient is a different batch. So you have a lot of variations, and for every variation you need to put together a dossier, send it to EMA, pay a fee, have them review, reply to questions, so on and so forth. That's a huge amount of work. And so when we showed them the numbers, and we're trying to keep it as lean as possible in terms of structure, both us and Orphan therapies, but despite that, it's quite relevant. They said we really had no idea at all. We expected that to be much lower. So I said, well, now that you know how much it costs, either on one side you can decide to change a bit the regulation, make it our life simpler and easier and less expensive, which will always be welcome. But otherwise, if you want us to keep the product on the market, that's the price. And we brought them the real numbers of the other products, stream values that we took back from Orchard Therapeutics. In the first 18 months, we've lost almost 3 million euro on that product, just for the maintenance, because we have treated 2 patients, but we have spent like 4 million, more or less, to keep the product on the market. And there was a major variation. There were things that happen with when you have a product. They have to move the manufacturing site from one building to another. That costed us a couple of millions, basically. And that's what happened with this product. And when you rely on very small number of patients, and so it's very small revenue, those accounts for quite make it unsustainable.
Thank you. I've got a question over here.
So we are still in the education phase.
Yeah, congratulations on a really novel partnership. I was just wondering, how does this scale in any way, and do the economics look better if you were to take on 5 of these medicines or 10 of these medicines?
Yeah, I think that's the whole intent, is that it does scale. We're building infrastructure and partnerships specific to certain types of therapies and modalities. So, for a therapy like this, there are others out there that are going to be challenged from a commercial perspective. But if you're serving, 2 or 3 or 4 of those therapies with the same team and the same partnerships, you can do it a lot more efficiently and keep those costs down. Also, as a nonprofit, we're hopeful that we could be more of kind of a test kitchen for approaches with payers and regulators around, how do we do this more efficiently, because the conversations with regulators and payers in the US kind of mirror what Stefano was talking about in Italy and Europe more broadly. I think they're aware of what some of the drivers of costs are, but they're not aware of how much of that comes from their own regulatory demands. So if they're able to be more flexible there, it'll take a few years, because you got to build that in upstream and carry it through. But we could see some of these costs coming down, and then if you have a more efficient model to deliver and get those products to patients, then that can have a significant impact.
Oh, can we get a microphone down at the front, please? Thank you.
Absolutely amazing partnership and model. But more a question to you, Stefano. With this transparency model, and you know what I will be talking about because it's one of your products, could we imagine to renegotiate a price to increase it? I know that usually in the classical model, when it comes to renegotiation, it's to obtain a lower price, but we know that there has been products which have been abandoned by the classical pharma, partly because they consider they couldn't get the right price. At the Fondazione Telethon, you are carrying almost alone the stream values, for which we know the price has been negotiated years ago when all these models and transparency was not there. So could we imagine that this transparency and this open negotiation could lead to bringing old product back to the market with the good price for them to be sustainable and available for the patient?
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So we submitted a request to the Italian agency to see whether we could raise the price of stream values, because that was priced in 2016 and it was priced 600,000. But if you look at it right now, knowing how much the price of gene therapy is now, it looks ridiculous, but it was 10 years ago. So, and it's not sustainable. So what we've done was really sharing with the agency, all the data of the cost, and showing also that because we are not treating patients, Italian patients, in the last year we have not been treating Italian patients. Actually, it's not even that Fondazione Telethon is subsidizing the Italian healthcare system. We're subsidizing healthcare system of other countries that sends patients there, and you are treated at that price, which is lower than the cost of keeping the product to the market. So I said, I don't think it's fair for Italian donors to really pay for the healthcare of citizens around Europe, even if we all want to treat all the patients as possible. So I think that it is, let's see, we haven't had any positive response yet, but we're still discussing and negotiating, so we hope that we will have good news, hopefully by the end of the year.
Oh, we've got a question over here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Wilson. So I had these discussions with FDA in the earlier days, when Peter Marks was there, about how to deal with these diseases in which there are a very limited number of patients. And then he connected me with some of his colleagues, and they suggested you do it under a perpetual IND, so you actually don't go for market authorization. Now, if you want a PRV, okay, that's not going to help you, but putting that aside, and that you could actually recover your costs under a perpetual IND. That's what I've been told, and I don't know if you've had. I didn't really pursue it, and there are precedents for that. Biologic products that are never approved, for example, antivenoms are actually not approved, but the drug distributor can recover costs. The only reason why that could make sense if it would be more affordable to just continue to do this under perpetual IND. And Chris Benkowitz was doing this for AADC. PTC went ahead and got that product approved, but I don't know if you guys have thought about that.
Yeah, I guess what I worry about in that instance is the implications upstream for innovation. What's the incentive to innovate on these types of therapies if you're, and what does cost recovery really mean? Are you going to recover the full cost of having developed that therapy over X number of years? And what happens when there are unforeseen costs? You lose a batch, or so I think from an access perspective, yeah, it's great to be able to do that, but I think in order to address the scale of need here, there are 9,000 plus ultra rare diseases out there that don't have a treatment, and how are we going to incentivize more of those treatments to be developed and get to market if we don't leave in place some sort of commercially viable model? I think we saw what happened when the priority review voucher program was in limbo. It led to more of these programs being shelved. In some instances, that's the only viable way a company could justify developing a therapy, if they're able to recoup the upstream costs of development. And so I think, maybe for N of 1, some type nano-rare types of products, particularly when it's in a modality where the manufacturing costs are lower, and some of the CMC requirements are less, that may be a viable way to go. I think for a lot of the advanced therapies, though, it'd be tough to generate a lot of interest or success that way.
Great. Any other questions? No. Great. Thanks so much. So you've shared incredibly insightful and valuable information today, and I wonder if you wanted the audience to take home, some key points, what would they be? Oh.
As a matter of fact.
I made earlier.
I think what we're learning is that there's not a great immediate way to bring the price down of these types of therapies. You know, they're going to be in that similar range because these are treatments that were developed over the last 20 years in the same for-profit system that all these other therapies were. So, you know, there's not much you can do about that. I think in order to make them sustainably available, you need that FDA approval or EMA approval. And where we need to start to have an impact is on those fixed and other costs that are driven by the regulatory and other requirements that don't work when you just have 5 patients. They may work when you have 5,000. So getting some regulatory agreement and alignment around that. There are technologies that are improving from a manufacturing perspective and others that will, I think, help bring the cost down over time as well. And as we start to see that, those impacts will trickle into the pricing and access models for these therapies. But it's probably going to take, you know, a few years.
Great. I think we're getting kicked off now. We've more than ran our time, but thanks so much. It was a great discussion today. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.